The blizzard outside was hammering the glass walls of the Onyx Hotel's 40th floor boardroom, but the temperature inside was dropping even faster. I sat at the head of the obsidian table, reviewing the portfolio valuation. My mother, Gwendolyn, breezed in, shaking snow off her mink coat like she owned the place, followed by my father and sister. They didn't even look at my face. "Sweetie, grab us 3 lattes," my mother said, waving a hand at me without making eye contact. "And make it quick. We're here to collect our inheritance." She thought I was the secretary. Juliet Vance, our probate lawyer, didn't look up from her files. "She isn't the help, Gwendolyn. She is the chairwoman." Before I tell you what my mother's face looked like when the truth hit her, drop a comment and let me know. What time is it where you are right now? And have you ever been underestimated by your own family? To understand why I didn't flinch when my mother called me the help, you have to go back 15 years to the night she decided to call me a criminal. I was 13 years old, and I had just been accepted into the prestigious New York Architecture Summer Intensive. It cost $12,500. My parents, Gwendolyn and Victor, were drowning in debt. They hid behind country club memberships and leased luxury cars. They couldn't afford to send me, but their pride wouldn't let them admit that. They needed a way out that didn't shatter their ego, so they decided to shatter me instead. It happened on a Tuesday. My grandmother's antique diamond ring went missing. My father didn't even pretend to look for it. He walked straight into my room, pulled open my underwear drawer, and produced the ring like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. He tossed it onto my bed. "We know you stole it, Darby," he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was relieved. "You stole it to pay for that camp, didn't you?" I denied it, I cried, I begged, but then my mother pulled out the ultimate weapon. She picked up the house phone and dialed 3 digits. "I'm calling the police, Darby," she said, her finger hovering over the talk button. "Unless you sign this confession admitting you have a conduct disorder and need to be sent away for rehabilitation, you are going to juvenile detention tonight." I was a terrifyingly naive 13-year-old. I believed them. I signed the paper. Looking back, I understand exactly what was happening. Psychologists call it the trap of normalized cruelty. My parents weren't just being mean, they were resolving a cognitive dissonance. They felt deep shame about their financial incompetence. By framing me as a thief, they transferred that shame onto me. I became the problem. If I was a bad seed who stole jewelry, then they weren't bad parents for sending me away. They were victims protecting their home. It allowed them to rationalize their cruelty as necessary discipline. They turned me into a villain so they could keep pretending to be the heroes of their own sad, bankrupt story. They packed my life into a single suitcase. They didn't drive me to a boarding school or a reform center. They drove me to the south side of Chicago, to a gritty industrial district where my Uncle Wesley lived. Uncle Wesley was the family pariah, the black sheep who had allegedly squandered his potential. My father left the engine running when he kicked me out onto the curb. "He's your problem now," Victor yelled at the brick building. "Don't let her steal your silver." As they peeled away, leaving me standing in the slush, I realized they had done something worse than abandon me. They had stolen my reputation. They told every aunt, cousin, and family friend that I was a thief and a liar. They burned my bridges so I couldn't run back. I stood there in the snow, watching their pale lights fade, shivering not from the cold, but from the realization that the people who were supposed to love me had just executed a meticulously planned business transaction to get rid of me. Uncle Wesley didn't ask about the diamond ring. He didn't ask why I was shivering on his doorstep with a suitcase that smelled of exhaust fumes. He just looked at me with eyes that were sharp as flint and asked if I knew how to use Excel. My parents had told everyone Wesley was a failure, a burnt-out eccentric living in squalor. They were wrong. Wesley was a sleeping giant. He didn't live in that gritty neighborhood because he was broke. He lived there because he owned the entire block. He was quietly buying up distressed properties, renovating them into boutique experiences, and building the foundation of what would become the Onyx Hotel Group. I didn't have a teenage rebellion. I had an apprenticeship. While girls my age were worrying about prom dresses and homecoming dates, I was analyzing profit and loss statements and learning how to negotiate with union leaders. I traded my adolescence for equity. I learned to read a balance sheet before I learned how to drive. By the time I was 18, I wasn't just living in Wesley's guest room, I was managing his logistics. By 22, I was effectively his shadow partner. By 25, I was the ghost running the machine. Outsiders look at my resume, at the rapid ascent to chief operating officer, and they call it ambition. They call me a natural leader. But they don't see the invisible chain I drag behind me every single day. It's the chain of the survivor. When you have been thrown away by the people who made you, you stop believing that your existence is a given right. You start believing it is a bill that has to be paid daily. I didn't work 18-hour days because I was hungry for power. I worked them because a terrified part of my brain believed that if I stopped being useful for even 1 second, I would be put back out on that curb in the snow. My perfectionism wasn't a virtue. It was a trauma response. I built this empire not just to get rich, but to make myself indispensable. I wanted to become so heavy with value, so anchored by assets and authority, that no one could ever pick me up and toss me aside again. I wasn't building a career, I was building a fortress. My parents had no idea. To them, and to the rest of the extended family, I had vanished into the ether. Uncle Wesley played his part perfectly. Whenever they called, usually to borrow money they would never pay back, he would sigh and tell them I was struggling or finding my way. He let them believe I was in and out of rehab or working minimum wage jobs. He let them paint their own picture of my failure because it kept them away from my success. He knew that if they saw what I was becoming, they would try to harvest me. When Wesley died of pancreatic cancer last week, I didn't just lose an uncle. I lost the only person who saw me as an investment worth making. He left me everything, not just the money, but the weight of the crown. And now, sitting in this boardroom, waiting for the vultures to realize they were circling a hawk, I knew the time for hiding was over. The ghost was about to become very, very real. Can you believe this view, guys? CEO life, inheritance? Cassidy was holding her phone up, panning across the snowy Chicago skyline through the glass walls, careful to keep me out of the frame. She wasn't here to mourn Uncle Wesley. She was here to content farm his legacy. She looked at me with a sneer that didn't match her curated online persona. Darby, seriously, the coffee, and get some sparkling water while you're at it. My throat is parched from the flight. I didn't move. I just watched them. It was fascinating in a clinical way to see how little they had changed. They were the same people who had framed a 13-year-old, but now their greed had aged into something desperate and brittle. "We need to get started," Victor grumbled, checking his watch. A Rolex I knew was a replica because I knew exactly how much debt they were in. "We have a dinner reservation at Alinea at 8. Juliet Vance cleared her throat. The sound was like a gavel striking a desk. "We are not here to discuss dinner plans, Mr. Taine. We are here to discuss the execution of Wesley Kane's estate." "Right, the estate," Gwendolyn said, smoothing her skirt. She turned her gaze on me, her eyes devoid of warmth. "I know this must be awkward for you, Darby, working here as an assistant while your family owns the place, but don't worry, we'll take care of you. Maybe keep you on in housekeeping." "Actually," I said, my voice flat, "I'm not the assistant." Gwendolyn laughed, a tinkling artificial sound. "Oh, stop it. We know Wesley took you out of pity. We sent you to him so you would learn some discipline. That was our gift to you, Darby. Grit. We made you tough." The audacity was almost impressive. They were rewriting history in real time, turning their abandonment into a pedagogical strategy. They weren't villains in their own eyes. They were stern teachers who had forged my character. "We're challenging the will," Victor announced, dropping a thick binder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "We know Wesley wasn't in his right mind at the end. All those drugs for the cancer, he was vulnerable, and we know you were there, whispering in his ear, manipulating a dying man to get a few crumbs." Cassidy finally lowered her phone. "We want the hotels, Darby. All of them. The IP, the branding, the real estate. It's family money. It belongs to us. We're offering you a severance package, $5,000. Take it and go." They looked at me with expectant triumph. They thought they were negotiating with a scared little girl. They didn't realize they were trying to evict the architect from her own building. I didn't feel angry. I felt the cold, hard click of a trap snapping shut. "You're challenging the will based on mental incompetence?" I asked, my voice soft. "Exactly," Victor said, puffing out his chest. "And you believe the estate is worth $58 million? At least," Cassidy chirped. I looked at Juliet. She gave a microscopic nod. They had just walked right into the kill zone. They wanted the estate. Fine. I was about to show them exactly what that estate consisted of. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't give them the emotional explosion they were subconsciously craving. Emotion is messy. Data is pristine. I simply nodded at Juliet. She opened her briefcase and slid 3 leather-bound dossiers across the obsidian table. One for Gwendolyn, one for Victor, and one for Cassidy. They slid across the polished surface with a hiss that sounded like a blade being drawn. "What is this?" Gwendolyn asked, looking at the file like it might bite her. "It's a forensic audit," I said. "We call it the Onyx Ledger. Uncle Wesley was eccentric, yes, but he was also meticulous. He tracked every single penny that moved in and out of this family for the last decade." Victor scoffed, opening his folder. "We didn't take money from Wesley. We borrowed from legitimate banks. We have lines of credit." "Turn to page 4, Victor," Juliet said. Her voice was dry, like paper rustling. "Look at the creditor for your 2018 business expansion loan, the one you defaulted on. North Star Capital. Standard lender." "North Star Capital is a shell company," I interjected, "wildly owned by Wesley Kane." I watched the confusion ripple across his face. He flipped the page. "The lease on the Mercedes?" I asked. "Acme Leasing, another shell company. The second mortgage you took out to pay for Cassidy's brand launch party in Miami? Venture Horizon Trust. Also Wesley." The room went silent, save for the sound of pages turning frantically. They weren't reading financial statements anymore. They were reading the autobiography of their own incompetence. "You thought Wesley was broke because he lived simply," I said, leaning forward. "You thought you were outsmarting the system, borrowing from faceless institutions that you could charm or dodge. But Wesley bought your debt. Every time you failed, every time you overspent, every time you needed a bailout, he bought the paper. He didn't do it to save you. He did it to keep score." "That's impossible," Gwendolyn whispered. "We would have known." "You didn't know because you never looked past the surface, just like you never looked past the surface with me. You assumed Wesley was a fool, just like you assumed I was a thief. But while you were buying status, we were buying your liabilities." I tapped the spreadsheet in front of me. "You are challenging the will for $58 million, but according to this audit, the Kane family has already extracted approximately $4 million in unpaid loans, defaulted interest, and covered losses over the last 15 years. You haven't been disinherited, Gwendolyn. You've simply spent your inheritance in advance. You spent it on cars you couldn't drive, businesses you couldn't run, and a lifestyle you couldn't afford." Cassidy dropped her file. It hit the table with a slap. "So, there's no money?" "Oh, there's plenty of money," I said, closing my own folder. "It just doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the creditor." I let the pause hang in the frigid air. And as of last week, when I assumed control of the Onyx Hotel Group and its subsidiaries, that creditor is me. Gwendolyn stared at the forensic audit. her face gray. She looked like a woman trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Then I saw the exact moment her survival instinct kicked in. She snapped the folder shut. "Fine," she spat, her voice trembling but regaining that familiar edge of arrogance. "Keep the hotels. Keep the debt. We don't need your charity, Darby. We have our home. We have the house in Waukegan. It's worth $2 million and it's fully paid off. We'll sell it, clear our names, and be done with you people." She stood up, smoothing her coat, trying to summon the dignity of a matriarch. "Come on, Victor. Cassidy, we're leaving. We still have a roof over our heads that she can't touch." I didn't move. I just tapped the glass table with my index finger. The sound was small, rhythmic, and terrifyingly loud in the silent room. "Sit down, Gwendolyn," I said. It wasn't a request. "Excuse me?" she bristled. I said, "Sit down. We haven't discussed the real estate portfolio yet." "We just told you," Victor barked, his face flushing red. "You can keep the commercial properties. The house is ours. It's in my name." I looked at Juliet. She reached into her briefcase one last time and pulled out a single heavy document bound in blue legal paper. It wasn't an audit. It was a deed. "Do you remember 5 years ago, Victor?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "You stopped paying the mortgage. You were 6 months behind. The bank sent a foreclosure notice. You were 3 days away from the sheriff putting a padlock on the front door, the same door you pushed me out of." Victor froze. His eyes darted to Cassidy, then back to me. "Wesley fixed that. He told me he talked to the bank. He said he handled it." "Wesley didn't talk to the bank," I corrected. "He bought the note. He paid off the arrears and purchased the property outright to stop the foreclosure. He didn't want his brother on the street, despite everything. But Wesley wasn't stupid. He knew if he left the deed in your name, you would just leverage it again. You would take out a second mortgage to pay for another country club membership or another one of Cassidy's failed startups. So he transferred the title." "Transferred it to who?" Gwendolyn whispered. The arrogance was gone now, replaced with a dawning, icy horror. "To a blind trust," Juliet interjected, sliding the blue document across the table. "The DK-13 Trust." "DK-13?" Victor squinted at the paper. "Darby Kane, age 13. I said, "The age I was when you framed me, the age I was when you decided I didn't deserve a home." The realization hit them like a physical blow. Cassidy dropped her phone. Gwendolyn gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The wind outside howled against the glass, but inside, the silence was absolute. "I own the house, Gwendolyn," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I have owned it for 5 years. You haven't been paying a mortgage because there is no mortgage. You haven't been paying property taxes because the trust pays them. You have been living there, rent-free, as guests of a trust designed to protect the very asset you tried to throw away." I watched the math happening in their eyes. They weren't just broke. They weren't just in debt. They were trespassing. The roof they thought was their sanctuary, their last bastion of status, belonged to the daughter they had discarded. "You can't," stammered Victor. "It's our home." "It's my asset," I corrected, and frankly, as the new trustee, I have to look at the numbers. The property is degrading. You haven't fixed the roof. The landscaping is overgrown. You are bad tenants. "We're your parents!" Gwendolyn shrieked, the desperation finally breaking through. "You can't evict your own parents." "Why not?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "I evicted you, a 13-year-old. You didn't just evict me, you framed me to make sure I had nowhere to go. You drove me to the south side of Chicago and left me in the snow. At least I'm letting you have this conversation in a heated boardroom." I stood up and walked to the window. Looking out at the blizzard, I felt an immense, ancient power coursing through me. It wasn't the power of money, it was the power of leverage. For 15 years, I had been the one waiting for permission to exist. Now I held the keys to their entire reality. "I am the landlord," I said to the reflection in the glass, "and your lease has just expired." The silence in the boardroom was broken by the sound of my mother weeping. It wasn't the elegant single tear crying she performed at funerals. It was the ugly, gasping sob of someone watching their entire identity disintegrate. Victor slumped in his chair, looking less like a patriarch and more like a man realizing he was about to be homeless. "Please," Gwendolyn choked out. "Darby, please. We can't pay market rent in Waukegan. We're retired. We have nothing." "You have $2 million in equity that you thought was yours," I said, sliding a pen across the table. "But you don't have cash flow. That is a liquidity problem." I didn't feel pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of a balanced equation. "I am not going to evict you tonight," I said. "I am not you. I don't leave people in the snow. But I am a businesswoman. This is a lease agreement. It stipulates a monthly rent of $6,000, which is fair market value for the area. You have 30 days to sign it or vacate the premises." "We can't afford that," Cassidy whined, her voice small. "Then I suggest you get a job," I replied. "I hear the Onyx Hotel is hiring housekeeping staff. We offer competitive benefits." They didn't sign the lease. They couldn't. They moved out 3 weeks later, downsizing to a 2-bedroom apartment in a less prestigious suburb. They sold the Mercedes. They stopped going to the country club. They became exactly what they were always terrified of becoming: ordinary. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the newly renovated Onyx Chicago. The snow was gone, replaced by the pale, hopeful light of spring. I wasn't there to check guest lists. I was there to cut a ribbon. Behind me, etched into frosted glass, were the words, "The Wesley Kane Foundation." "This is where the justice of the survivor comes in," I told the assembled crowd. "Most people think justice is about watching your enemies burn. But burning them takes energy. It keeps you tethered to them, feeding the fire. True justice isn't destruction, it's creation. It's taking the manure they threw on you and using it to fertilize a garden they will never be allowed to enter." The foundation provides full housing and tuition scholarships for youth who have been displaced or wrongly accused by their families. We don't just give them a room, we give them a lawyer. We give them a future. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Juliet Vance nodding approvingly. I saw my new team, hand-picked and loyal. I checked my phone. A text from Gwendolyn, blocked, was sitting in the spam folder. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. They tried to bury me in the snow 15 years ago. They didn't realize I was a seed. I didn't just survive their winter. I bought the land, I built the castle, and I wrote the rules. That is the only revenge that matters. They tried to erase me, but they only sharpened me. If you are currently building your empire from the rocks your family threw at you, I want to hear from you. Drop a crown emoji in the comments if you are the cycle breaker in your family. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power. You are the architect of your own life.